We are all so busy these days, and we're always looking for helpful tips and advice on how to find a better work-life balance. We all have to earn a living and pay the bills, but are you doing enough to look after yourself and your health at the same time? Now, many of us prioritise careers and work, and we're slaving over our computers and mobiles all the time. But does this make you cut corners on your diet, exercise or sleep? I'm Dr. Ben Sinclair, and welcome to Health versus Wealth with Dr. Ben. Our guests share their life experiences and we discuss their challenges in their health and their wealth. I hope their experiences will help you with your life and health. Today I'm delighted to welcome back Ninder Johal, one of the West Midlands' most high-profile business trailblazers and networkers. Now, Ninder, thank you so much for coming back.
Great to be back.
Thank you. And last week you were telling us about your global success in the music industry, and I know you sold 15 million records. How did that springboard into other things?
So we were at that point, so we were in 2007, so we've got a great industrial unit full of CDs and vinyls and a little bit of music cassettes. So we were shifting a lot of what we call physical product and doing well all around the world. And then, and of course, 2007 came. This is our COVID. And a certain Steve Jobs did a presentation and said to people on the globe, we're bringing something called an iPhone. You might think, so what's a phone? But what this phone allowed you to do was download tracks whenever you wanted, whatever price you wanted to pay, and you could download whenever. So a typical consumer up till this point would have to wait for a shop to open, a retail outlet, 9 o'clock till 5. They could only buy potentially an album, or maybe a single, but an album. You couldn't say, I want tracks 2 and 4. You'd have to buy the physical thing.
But the whole thing.
The whole thing. You would then, having purchased that CD or vinyl, would then have to go home and have an electric supply, hopefully, to then place the CD or the vinyl into.
Yeah, in your hi-fi.
In your hi-fi.
Yeah.
And then, of course, although you had Walkmans, but you couldn't really listen to these things other than in a static place. But with that phone, you could download at 2 in the morning. You could download whichever track you wanted, and you could download it for about 90p. Whilst that was happening, there was a lot of websites you could download for free. So suddenly, my industry, the music industry, was facing disruption at an unprecedented level. Unprecedented, because suddenly the consumer was dictating how and when and where they purchased the product. Now, naturally what you do is you fight back and you think, well, actually, I'm not letting the consumer do that, particularly the free downloading, so we will sue everyone. So the whole industry, Universal, Sony, started issuing desist notices from the spotty 14-year-old next door who couldn't afford an album to the 80-year-old aunt who discovered the wonders of the internet. And suddenly they were getting desist noticing, you cannot download for free. One thing I've learned in life is that the consumer is always right. And so then eventually the whole industry capitulated and suddenly all the physical stocks disappeared, the shops disappeared, people making CDs disappeared, the wholesalers who would buy off me as a record company then to sell on to retailers, they disappeared. In fact, the whole supply chain disappeared.
So it's dismantled by this
completely
culture.
By digital. What we also knew, though, as the first people on the chopping block, that we were not going to be alone. We knew the film industry would go next. Blockbusters went, Netflix came, and we knew that other people would get touched. Print journalism, websites, you can now access news from anywhere and everywhere. And so suddenly the whole world was flipping totally opposite. And for us, that was our COVID. It wasn't COVID 2020. Our COVID was 2007, when our whole business model was instantly made redundant.
Wow.
We didn't have a business left. So we had to pivot. That was our first pivot. We had to follow the trends and we had to get all our tracks onto digital. And we had to think digital now and think what people consume digitally. We have to think digitally. So the people we start to employ were the ones even if they didn't know, were keen to understand the world of digital. The forklifts went, the big stocks went, the big units, industrial units went. We were now selling records in space, in the cloud.
So you branched out into promotion, film and video and events.
So what we knew at that point was that our future had now changed and that we had to change with the future. But what we knew we were good at branding, we were good at promotion with lots of artists. We understood entertainment, we understood creativity. So we thought, where can we apply that set of skills in another place? And we thought the event space is where we could do it. That would then took us into the space. But the problem then was we were launching effectively a new business. And when I said, well, how the hell do you do that? Because we never had to, because up to that point we were selling to kids around the world. And what was funny was, so until we sold internationally, I was only selling to people that looked like me and that spoke like me and dressed like me. And somebody said, well, you're going to have to now talk to people that look totally different. Actually, basically white people. Now, I'm born in the UK. The only white person I'd ever met up to that point was the tax man and the VAT man.
Really?
And they said, and I said, well,
wow.
How do I meet these white people if I'm going to get into this? They said, well, go and join the Chambers of Commerce.
Okay, quite a culture shift.
Quite a culture shift. So then I had to go into the Chambers of Commerce and understand the word called networking. I thought, what the hell does networking mean? Because of course, what I didn't know that in my record company days when I was globetrotting, actually I was networking without realising. And it's just about relationships and building relationships. So that's what took us the events. So we did our first, we did an event for somebody and it went well. We thought actually maybe we should launch our own brand. So we launched a signature brand in Birmingham. And Birmingham's only 12 miles away from Wolverhampton. It still felt another world. So that was the geographical diversity you also have to adopt, never know ethnicity, the geographical. Then we did well in Birmingham, so we set up one in Wolverhampton. That did really well. Then we moved into Leicester. That started to do well. Then we moved into London. That started to do well. And now we're in Manchester and we're now looking overseas. So what do these events do? Well, we're in the entrepreneurial space. And in the entrepreneurial space, we think business too often is not celebrated and applauded for what it does for society. And entrepreneurs take risks. They do things other people don't do. They see opportunities other people are blind to. They do things while others think about it and maybe hide under the bed. They actually do it. They take risks by creating job opportunities and employment. They create wealth for themselves, but wealth for others. Their taxes pay for the public services we all enjoy. And I think all of that sometimes just does not get recognised. So we thought through that events, we would encourage and we would inspire people to do even better than they do, and to then also allow them during that event to actually network with other people and learn from other people as well. So learning, celebrating, and really just making sure that we inspire people and connect people. And that was the main thrust. And most of that came from when I was president of the Black Country Chamber of Commerce, and I had an opportunity, and back to diversity, I had an opportunity to meet small businesses, medium-sized, large businesses, female-driven, ethnicity-driven, and you see the full spectrum of your community at work, but with one objective in common, which was to run a business and to be enterprising and to be innovative and to create the products of tomorrow.
And the signature awards, you recognise this talent. Why is that important to you?
I think because of the internet, there's a lot of noise that happens, and sometimes the people who don't say much are the ones who actually do the most. And so it's left for people like us and my business and other businesses to promote and to acknowledge the difference these people make. And they do make a difference, because I tell you, an economy that's functioning well, an economy that has full employment, an economy that is producing new products will produce a society that is at ease, a society that appreciates other people, and a society that will continue to innovate going forward. You need a society that isn't in conflict, where everybody has a living they can aspire to, where everybody's treated well. But if you have a misfunctioning economy, you get inequality, you get poverty, and then that leads to crime. And I think the economy is pivotal to all of these things. But then you've got to acknowledge the players in that economy. that allows society to function, for buses to go in the right, for doctors to be able to treat, the nurses, the dentists, the police, the fire service, the civil service. The functioning of a country has to be paid for somehow. And that normally comes from the economy, and the economy is driven by entrepreneurs. So we've got to inspire the next generation to say, wow, they're great. Would I not like to be somebody like that? So I think that's the role we should all be playing, is to make society a better place for people to live in, people to work in, and people to have leisure in.
Now, with those profound views expressed, I know 5 years ago you actually had quite a proud moment, and you were asked to take on a very special royal role. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, it's a role called the Deputy Lieutenant. So throughout the country we have lieutenancies, and they're the link between the royal family and the community with which they're based. So I belong to the West Midlands Lieutenancy. We have a Lord Lieutenant, and then he has a number of deputies, of which I am one. So our role is to keep an eye on how society is functioning, is to identify individuals and businesses and charities that do really well for their communities, then to put their names forward for accolades like the King's Awards or the MBEs and the OBEs. And this is for others and them to acknowledge what a brilliant job they've done towards their community or the economy. And so we're the sort of the eyes in the community that can see these things. We can also endorse when people put names forward, but also we're there to have a presence at functions and all kinds of things where they need a royal presence, where obviously the royal family can't make it. So we're the ears and eyes of the royal family, and we're the connection and the connectors between the royal family and the community.
And have you met King Charles?
Yeah, interestingly, my wife and I went to an event. It was a polo, actually. It was about a decade ago, and he was then Prince.
He was Prince Charles?
He was Prince Charles then. But been to Buckingham Palace, and we're going in May again, Ninder and I. But yeah, we met all the royals, and they're all very different people with their own different personalities and their own different views on the way society should function and how the globe works.
And what are you going to do when you go to meet King Charles?
Well, this actually is a garden party, and I think sometime in May.
What, is it at Buckingham Palace?
It's at Buckingham Palace.
Wow.
So I've had the good fortune, I've been there a few times, and I've had the good fortune again through my roles with the Chamber and the Black Country Left that I've been to number 10 quite a few times, met quite a few of the Prime Ministers. Again, they're all different people with a different perspective on the way the globe and this society works. So again, it's back to my point, it's meeting people that are better than you. I think it's important that you do meet people and you mix with people that are ahead of the game, so they drag you by the straps and pick you up and say, come along with me. So yeah, all very interesting.
For those of you who are joining us late, I'm with Ninder Johal, who is a frequent visitor to Downing Street. Now, how many Prime Ministers have you met?
Actually, since 2010, I've met them all. Johnson twice, Cameron, Sunak, and I've met them all except, and you won't be surprised by this, Prime Minister Truss. Wasn't there long enough.
She wasn't there long enough for you to get to meet her.
And all very interesting characters, actually, all of them. All very, very, very different in how they conduct meetings and how they speak to you and how they present themselves to you. Very interesting.
Now, moving on to a very interesting area of recent history, the pandemic era. In 2020, lots of businesses were pivoting. At Dr. Finley's, we pivoted towards GP home visiting and online medical services. And, we've got here the Business Influencer magazine. What happened with your pivoting in the pandemic?
So, if you recall earlier, I talked about having to pivot back in 2007. That was our true pivot when we actually had to completely change our business model. So, when we came to 2020, it wasn't such a shock, actually, because we'd already been through that trauma back in 2007. But the problem we had was that we had a fully functioning events business, but suddenly based on meeting people person to person. Suddenly, 2020, we were told you can't meet people person to person. And so suddenly we had this big community of attendees at our various events, but we couldn't see them. And so we thought, well, how do we stay in touch with them from a branding perspective? Do we send them a direct email? We've got to stay relevant. Because the problem at that point was we didn't know when the vaccine would come out. If there was ever going to be a vaccine, we didn't know that. So we could be in hibernation for 5-6 years, who knows? And we thought, well, how do we stay in contact with this community we built? So that's where the idea of the magazine came. Now, you can imagine this. We talked about the transition from physical to digital. So to produce a physical magazine, people said, you're crazy. Why would you want to produce a physical magazine when everybody's reading digital?
It almost sounds like a backward step.
Yeah, you're going backwards. So having made the transition, but what I knew was that people, to a certain extent, can overdo it on the digital. They need something physical to do. I know I still subscribe to the Financial Times and the Sunday Times and the Times, but I still buy the physical. Because actually, sometimes it's quite good to feel. I like reading books.
It's that visceral experience of the thing in your hand.
And so I did my research during the COVID, and surprisingly, the numbers for magazines and books had gone through the roof. So people were interested in the physical format. Then what we decided to do as well, I bought every magazine you could think of. And what we noticed was that most magazines were producing cheaper paper, and the whole thing was reduction in cost. So I went the other way. I made the magazine as expensive as possible, retailed at the most expensive price, and said, well, I know the people who like reading physical actually tend to earn quite good money. And for them, £10 in W.H. Smith's is not a problem. And in America, it's $25. It's not a problem. So we went for, and of course, at our events, we tend to attract people who are doing well because they're running businesses, entrepreneurs who are affluent. So it seemed to fit from a brand perspective really, really well. It was a big risk because I had to turn around to my team and say, yesterday you were event organizers, today you're publishers. And I remember one of the guys said to me, have you ever done an experience in publishing? I said, none. Have you ever printed a magazine? I said, none. And I said, well, I'd never run a record company before.
So you kept them on their toes.
Yeah, so I said, look, at the end of the day, you've got to be able to learn new stuff. And of course, what I didn't know, which I then discovered, was what was a side project just to keep our people happy. People liked it, people bought it, subscribed to it. W.H. Smiths liked it, the Americans liked it, and suddenly we had a new business really got it. So, but what I didn't know is that people like to be featured in physical magazines. They're not so enamored with being featured digitally. And so actually we managed to get some great features of some absolutely incredible people because they like to be in there. Including, of course, your very good self.
The resident doctor. And what I love about this is it's a heavy coffee table edition that stays around.
That's right.
So hopefully my good advice about sleep and that's stress management stays around long enough for people to actually dive into.
Yeah. But it's also obviously available digitally as well.
Exactly.
Obviously.
And I think, for me, that's what drives me is getting good information out there.
Yeah.
Bhangra drove you in the past. What drives you now, Ninder?
I think always you want to be the best at what you do. You want to be the very best at what you do, and you try and encourage those around you to be the very best that they do. And I suppose what we're trying to do now is what drives us is to encourage more wealth creation, is to encourage more businesses to do even better. The more people you associate with who are doing well, the probability is they'll bring a few other people with them. And I think if we can encourage people to be focused and to think about others rather than themselves, the whole thing works well together. But ultimately, our success will be measured by the number of attendees, the number of magazines, and how our brand grows. So for the first 9 years, really, we've been driving to create a brand that is trustworthy, a brand that is recognizable, which then means the next decade we can now move into new ventures if we want to, having built a brand that fulfills that criteria. So what drives me is really I just want to see the country in a better place. I want to see the region in a better place. And I think to do that, we need a better economy, a better local economy, and we need enterprise at the centre of it. Because if enterprise drives everything, and of course, you want to eradicate poverty, you want everyone to do well, and you want everyone to have a dream that they think they can fulfill. But more importantly, everybody should have the same opportunity to be able to dream.
Now, one of your great loves is sport, and I know you love tennis, football. You were a keen wicketkeeper.
Absolutely.
And sometimes, we're on this entrepreneurial journey and health gets in the way. You were always on your feet in the music industry. But in 2012, some physical symptoms led you to end up with an encounter with a nurse. Can you tell us a bit more about that in your own health?
Well, I remember we were playing in Berlin. I got off the stage, my feet were really hurting. I thought, this is not good. This is not good. Why are my feet really hurting? And of course, remember, we were having lots of fast food and diet and everything. And so I rang my local surgery and I said, I'd like to come in. My feet are hurting. At which point, the receptionist went away for a second, came back and said, yep, all sorted. You need to come and see a nurse. I said, a nurse? No, I've asked to see the doctor. She said, no, you need to come and see a lifestyle nurse. I was thrown back by this. I'd never heard the term before.
It was a new thing in 2012, actually.
Yeah. Is that right?
Raise awareness of lifestyle issues.
Right.
We knew that people were, not looking after the physical health.
Yeah. So I said, no, you've got this wrong. I need to see a doctor. She said, no. We insist you come and see our lifestyle nurse. I said, well, firstly, that got me thinking, what the hell's wrong with my lifestyle there?
Yeah.
So anyway, so I went in, did the usual measurements, wrote down a few things, and then pulled out some charts. And she said, you're overweight, she said, according to these charts, you're obese. And that stunned me. I knew I was a bit overweight, but I think that stunned me. But
it's quite a stinging comment when you hear that, isn't it?
But the next comment really stung. And she said, currently on this trajectory you're on, you have a 50% chance of having a heart attack.
Wow.
Now, when someone says 50% of having a heart attack, 1 in 2, the first comment was telling this was like a rocket. And she said, so we have to do measures now. We have to undertake measures that reduces that propensity from 50 to lower down.
So what did she measure and what did she tell you to do?
Right. She then said, she went through my diet.
Right.
She went through my sleeping patterns. What was obvious was I was snacking a lot, but then you expect that in the music industry, you're in the studios, you're playing, you're stopping. So it was diet, the wrong types of food, irregular eating. And she said, right, we have to now routinize everything. So have a routine. You have to log everything that you eat. And we'll do this every couple of weeks, and then we'll do it every month. So I was on a strict diet. So I had to get rid of fats. I had to get rid of all kinds of things that might affect you. Sugars was bad. Chips, I was having a lot of chips, a lot of fried food. And so I had to drop all of that.
Yeah.
I was having very little water, maybe sugary stuff again, irregular sleep, eating. Anyway, so
and this was all aimed at weight loss, wasn't it? Because those things all help to get your weight down. What target did she give you to
right,
lose?
So at that point, believe it or not, I was 18.5 stone. And she said, right, we need you at. I said, what? She said, we need you at 13 stone. I said, you are crazy. I'm not going to lose 5 stone. So I said, can we compromise? Can we compromise?
So you're negotiating with the nurse.
I said, can we settle at 15? I think that might be doable.
Yeah.
And she said, okay. And I thought just to get to 15 would be brilliant. And we did manage to hit 15. So I think I'm around 14, 15 now. Could do with a bit more.
Yeah.
But that was a big shock to the system. And I think the shock to the system was the second bit, was it's no longer about you, it's about your family. So if something was to happen to me at the age of 50, then it would be my family that would lose out and not necessarily just me. And that's what then pushed me to do it. But again, I would argue I should have been taught that at school. I should have been told at school, this is the sleeping patterns you should have, this is what you should eat, this is what you shouldn't eat. And, we've heard this recent thing about cigarettes and trying to, well, maybe they should have taught it. And, putting sugar tax on things, people don't see that. You've got to be educated to understand the health.
So you were educated by a nurse later in life.
Yeah.
And, we've talked about some of the things you had to do to adapt to a poor lifestyle. And I always say you can't escape the consequences of a poor lifestyle. And they rack up over time. Yeah. You were punishing schedule, lack of sleep, eating junk food, and it finally caught up with you. Would you mind if I sort of talked about your own health and work-life balance, that kind of thing?
Absolutely.
Give you some tips and advice now. Being a doctor.
Yeah, go for it.
And this is what we do in the Business Influencer magazine. Putting in good advice. I mean, the key things you said was sleep, because if you have poor sleep, your stress hormone, cortisol, goes up, and that causes you to gain weight. And it also causes inflammation, which leads to heart disease and things like arthritis. So sleep's a biggie. So I think, we'd quickly ask you, how many hours of sleep are you trying to get at the moment?
But just picking up your comment about arthritis, that was interesting. So when I was in my mid-30s, I didn't know this, I got arthritis.
Oh, right, yeah. So you already had some signs there.
Yeah, so I didn't realise that was a consequence of what you've just said.
Yeah.
So when the nurse said to me, you need to get fitter, I said, well, I can't, because my knees won't let me do it. And she said then, well, I think you just need to at least walk, even if you can't do impact sports. So you're absolutely right. Everything you've just said makes sense, because I got arthritis much earlier than I should have. And that might have been a function of bad diet and sleep.
Very interesting. And walking is some of the best exercise you can do. It's low impact. You can do it all the time. And it's actually one of the best things that you can do for your health.
Well, it's an arbitrary figure. So I try and do about 10,000 steps if I can a day. Now, I tell you why that's important, because when I'm at an event, I tend to do 30,000. So if I don't do the 10, it means on the night of the event, I'm not likely to be able to do 20, never mind 30. So at least I can do 10 regularly. And what I found by doing the 10,000 steps is not only did I feel better in myself, but I used to have a pretty bad back pain. But that disappeared overnight as well. So even though it's not, some people say 10,000 versus 15 minutes of, 1,000 or something, I just tend to find it just keeps me going longer.
ਵੱਜਦੀ ਹੋ ਡਿਸਕੋ ਚ ਕਿੰਗ ਵੱਜਦੀ ਹਾਏ ਹਾਏ ਅੱਜ ਪੰਗੜਾ ਪੰਜਾਬੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਪਾਉਣਾ ਡਿਸਕੋ ਚ ਕਿੰਗ ਵੱਜਦੀ ਹੋ ਡਿਸਕੋ ਚ ਕਿੰਗ ਵੱਜਦੀ ਹੋ ਡਿਸਕੋ ਚ ਕਿੰਗ ਵੱਜਦੀ ਹਾਏ ਹਾਏ ਅੱਜ ਪੰਗੜਾ ਪੰਜਾਬੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਪਾਉਣਾ ਡਿਸਕੋ ਚ ਕਿੰਗ ਵੱਜਦੀ ਡਿਸਕੋ ਚ ਕਿੰਗ ਵੱਜਦੀ
Ninder, thank you so much for coming in today. It's been a huge pleasure talking to you, and I do hope you get a safe journey home.
Well, I'm off now to go and check the latest issue featuring your good self.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So that's it for today. I hope my guest and I have helped you meet some of your health versus wealth challenges. Now, to hear more from me, Dr. Ben, why not subscribe on your usual podcast platform? And if you like my advice or you'd like to be a guest on the show, you can email me on podcast@drfinlays.co.uk. Anyway, I hope to see you again, but for now, it's goodbye from me, Dr. Ben.